Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back. I'm Vanessa, your host with Your Life Beyond the Military. And we're so happy today that Kevin Bemel could join us. Kevin is an amazing guy. Just met him through LinkedIn, and we have been already talking so much. I'm like, I should be hitting record an hour ago. But Kevin was a Navy chaplain. So that always holds a dear spot in my heart because, you know, being a woman of faith too, I would love that everywhere we went, every base we'd go to, I was like, where's that chaplain's office? Where do they live? Where are they hiding? And they were the ones that were out talking to the spouses. They're the ones that we could rely on when our guys are deployed. So I love having the chaplains around. So thank you so much, Kevin, for joining. Kevin, just a little background, was actually in the Navy from 2006 all the way to 2022. So quite a time of service. He served as a chaplain where he helped sailors and Marines in naval aviation, submarine squadrons, special operations, as well as soldiers and airmen advance their careers and work through issues such as infidelity, criminality, and abuse. So he's seen it all. I'm sure he's got all kinds of stories. And today we're going to, oh my gosh, it even says here, his last position was as a command chaplain for the SEAL team. So I am sure he has dealt with some post-traumatic stress and some serious conversations with our vets. And we want to pull his nuggets in just like maybe 20 minutes and get some highlights from Kevin on business lessons from the military. So I will turn it over to Kevin and we will just go through a few lessons and go into a deep dive and see what we can share with our audience. So thank you, Kevin, for joining.
You're welcome, Vanessa, and thanks for having me on. And I just want to point out, I'm wearing my khaki-colored vest in honor of all my the Marines that I worked with.
My husband too. Hoorah!
Judy was in Okinawa, so you know.
I love it. Yeah, our whole wardrobe is green like that. Like my husband tries to go shopping still today, and it's shades of green. That should be the name of the book. I'm like, how about a blue or a hot pink?
It's an occupational hazard, right?
So true.
So, you know, you mentioned we were talking before we went live, and you asked what I think is the central question, and that I seek to answer in my show, Business Lessons from the Military, which is what are those, you know, sort of most seminal lessons that we can draw for civilian life from our time in the military. And the first one I mentioned was that civilian life is much more like the chaos of the battlefield than it is any other part of military life. And so I think there's an inherent challenge there because most of us don't have battlefield experience in the military anymore. Only a small percentage, I think less than 10% of service members actually get into anything like kinetic combat, right? We're all supporting the folks who are, you know, at the tip of the spear, so to speak, right? So we live a very regimented, disciplined life, very predictable. Our career path, very predictable, right? If we're enlisted, you know, we come in as you know, maybe a private, become a PFC, a lance corporal, a corporal, or a, you know, corporal, sergeant, depending on what our branch is. Not so good on the enlisted for the Air Force because
doing good.
Different things, right? And as an officer, right? You know, in the Navy. I mean, I was lucky. I started as a lieutenant JG, but you start as an ensign generally, right? And you know what those career markers are, right? It's not like that at all in civilian life. And so what I found and I've worked with a lot of military people making transitions, they're surprised by how chaotic civilian life is compared to the military. Now, interestingly enough, when I talk to like guys coming out of the SOF community, the special operations community, so they get it because they live in that world all the time. And even SOF, what we called it, I was an enabler, which I know sounds sort of salacious, right? But I was one of the people who enabled the operators to go forward, right? I was supporting all that, right? So even for the enablers, because we live in that environment, or not live, but, you know, work in that environment, so we have a greater sense of the chaos of the battlefield than a lot of other people do. So I think that one of the things to realize is in the military, when we go from military to business life, we're coming out of, I don't want to call it shelter because it's not shelter. We're coming out of a disciplined environment into a chaotic environment.
Some kind of box. We're coming out
right,
of the box.
Right. You know, predictable is the word I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
We come from a pretty predictable environment into a very chaotic environment. And that's really the transition that we're making. And you brought up a great point when we were talking about, it's not just, you know, us, the service members, it's our spouses, our children, you know, our whole family is coming from this, you know, pretty predictable world into this chaotic mess that we call civilian life. And so if we can recognize and intentionally deal with that, I think we do a much better job and we have much greater success.
I love that. And to be aware of it. So I'll just interject too, because I'm just speaking as a military spouse of 27 years, but I love it because it felt so organized and routine, and it was chaos. Oh my gosh. I went to work full time when my husband retired, and he took about a year paddleboard fishing and trying to figure out what's his next why and what he gets excited about. And then the kids, they'd come home from school and they were so confused. They're like, why is dad home? Why is dad making us a late snack? Is dad ever going to work again? Like, these were questions. So all of us were trying to find our new normal, right? So so definitely, and you kept mentioning the battlefield. I even worked on a collaborative book, and my little section is a military spouse falling in love overseas with my Marine. He was a Marine security guard in Africa. I was in the Peace Corps, but I call it the back end battlefield. So that's what it was. I mean, you guys are on the frontline battlefield, and I felt like the family, the spouses were on the back end, but it's still a battlefield. We're still kind of dealing with all kinds of flying, dodging bullets and whatever's coming at us while the guys are coming and going from our homes. So yeah, so many similarities, even from the veteran side, and then translating that to the spouse and family side. So I'm so glad you brought that off. And
I do have to take issue with one thing you said. You identified yourself as just a military spouse.
So bad at that. So bad at that.
X out the just, right?
Thank you for correcting me.
You may have been a very just person,
right? It's
right,
true.
in terms of justice, but there's no such thing as just a military spouse, right? I mean,
You're right.
You are on the front lines of the
back end.
The back end, right? And you know, in my time as a chaplain, as you mentioned, I dealt with a lot of spouses, both female and male spouses, because sometimes, you know, the spouse is the man, and in some cases for them it was really confusing because they're in a predominantly male environment, right? And their peers are mostly female. It's very confusing, right? But they adapt, and that's the. So this is, and this kind of goes into my second point that we were talking about, which is a lot of people, especially more sort of junior enlisted people, they come out of the military with this idea that they have really nothing to offer in the civilian business world. And I find that perplexing. So the example I think I used was I was talking to a young Marine about, you know, what he was going to do in civilian life, you know, career-wise. And he said, I don't know, I'm probably going to go work in a fast food place. I was just a trigger puller, you know. He was an infantryman,
right?
I know how to pull a trigger on a rifle, and that's it. I'm like, really, you know, Marine, that's all you got, you know, out of your whatever it was, 4 years in the Marine Corps? He said, yeah. I said, so you never learned to work well in a team? He said, well, yeah, you know. And I said, and you never learned how to be resourceful? He's like, well, yeah, I did learn that. By the way, I had just to digress for a moment, when I was with CAG 14, I had a Marine Corps fighter squadron. I used to call them my MacGyvers because they had the oldest fighter jets in the fleet, and I think they were keeping them together with chewing gum and duct tape.
Duct tape, for sure. I know duct tape was somewhere in there.
Right? It's like I'd go visit them, and I'm like, what's going on, Marines? They're like, yeah, we're trying to find some replacement parts for our legacy, FA-18s. I think because they were so old they couldn't find spare parts anymore, right? So there's all these skills that we get. In the business world, we call them soft skills or emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And it's not necessarily, everybody thinks about the military as being, well, you learn to be a great leader. And that's generally true. But not everybody is going to go into the business world and become, a CEO. Most of us are going to start more mid-level, where our ability to work with a team, motivate our team members, be able to focus on the mission, be flexible so we can see other options that are available to us. All of those things that we do almost by rote in the military are highly, highly valuable skills in the business world, because in civilian life, there aren't a whole lot of places to learn that, especially where the stakes are so high like they are in the military.
Mm-hmm. All that field experience, and it's just hard to put it on paper, like to translate like an adjective, to add to your resume. That's a hard part to translate. And very similar with the spouses too. I mean, I start off saying what am I saying? I'm not just a Marine Corps spouse or military spouse. With every move that our vets made, we're following along too. And what does that do for our jobs? It makes it very transient. I've been places where I hear people saying like, oh, we're not hiring her. She's leaving in 2 years. Like,
right.
Just take a knife to the heart, because I'm like, I still have value while I'm here. But yeah, some companies like, no, they don't want to invest all that when they know they're moving on in 2 or 3 years. And you realize over time, all the moves you've made, like, oh my gosh, I've lived in like 3 or 4 different continents. I speak several languages. I speak French. I was in the Peace Corps in Africa. I spoke an African dialect in my village. Every time we do a move, it's adaptable. It's being flexible. It's, I said earlier offline, Semper Gumby wife. That was what my signature was, just being flexible. But it's very hard to put all that and translate that to the next job and build that confidence. Like, yes, I do bring value to this company. And when I walk in there with my suit and I want to, compete with maybe some civilians for a certain position.
Right. So, and interestingly enough, I had a guest on my Monday show, which is Trust and Estates Weekly. And she has a business where if in the context of that show, like somebody will die, they leave behind their residence, somebody has to go in there, go through everything, figure out what are we going to keep, what are we going to get rid of, how are we going to handle all of this, and she said, she says, I'm looking to expand nationwide. And she said, and it's not, she doesn't work just with, probates and estate matters. She also works with people who are moving, people whose lives are in transition. And so she's trying to figure out, where do I find people who can handle this? Because she can teach them how to do the logistical stuff. But a lot of what she does, she described it as, I'm 90% an unlicensed psychologist and 10% a logistician, right? So I said, well, I recommend that you look to military spouses. Because this is what military spouses, and nobody can empathize with what someone's going through in a life transition that's overturning their house, than a military spouse who in her or her husband's career or in his wife's career has moved probably at least 2 or 3 times. And if they were in for 20 years, they've moved what, 8 to 10 times, right? Yeah. So there are actually businesses out there that are looking for what military spouses bring to the table. The challenge is that, even if we look at the number of military people and veterans in America, so I think it's 7% of Americans have ever been in the military total, and at any given time, it's only about less than 1% are on active duty, right? So it's not like, post World War II, where everybody knew someone who had been in the military or had been in it themselves. We don't have that familiarity between us and our fellow citizens. We don't have that common language. anymore. And so it's really hard for us to communicate with each other and figure out how do we work together for our mutual benefit. And I will say this, and this is where I'll take my military colleagues to heart. I think a lot of military people get into civilian society and they conclude that this idea that civilians want to help us, they're behind us. They say it's a lot of bunk, because when it really comes down to it, they're not helping us. And I said, well, they don't know how. I mean, the people I've met, the civilians I met, they badly want to help us. I talked to a guy yesterday, and I the way he was talking, I thought he must be former military. So I asked him, I said, "Are you former military?" He said, No, I'm not. And I said, "Oh, okay, you just kind of sound like you are." And he said, "Are you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, I was. And we got into this conversation about my career, and then relatives of his who had been in the military. And then he said, "Look, what can I do for you? How can I help you?" That was his statement, and he meant it sincerely. And by the way, he was on the phone this morning as I was coming to do your show, saying, "Hey, I've got a few questions for you." You know what I'm saying? So if we're willing to help them come into our world, they will open up their resources. They will open up really their hearts to us. But we've got to help them make that step, because they just don't have. They still think the military works like Kelly's Heroes or the Dirty Dozen or something.
Right. It evolves and changes. Yeah. So true. What I took out of that second part is the value again of the spouses. And it's funny, on my website, I actually have a drop down that says Moving Maven, and people have come to me saying, "Help me, I'm in a transition with a life move. I'm downsizing from my big house. My kids have left. I'm by myself and my dog. I'm stuck. I don't even know where to go. I don't even know what I'm doing." And so they hired me to help them break down, put everything in bite-sized chunks, and slowly, pace by pace. And then all of a sudden they're like in their new place now, and they're just thriving and all that. So it's normal for me. And it transfers to our kids too. Our daughter's in Maryland and getting ready for a move, and her boyfriend or fiance, I mean, he was the one that's like, "How are we gonna do this move and all that?" And she's already done it twice when they left college. And then the second round, and he's just amazed. He'll send messages like, "I don't know how your daughter does it." And she's totally organized. She's got the boxes labeled, kitchen, bathroom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I train her to do that, but she grew up with that. So she just tells him, "Don't worry, I got it." It's a little benefit he gets, because she's not going to be that one going in circles like, "Oh my gosh, it's another move." She's just like, "All right, we got to move, power forward." So the Moving Maven thing, that's what we do.
Yeah, and I don't know if she experienced this, and this is not to knock young people in college today, but there is a marked difference between a military brat, as we used to call them, who's now in college, and someone who hasn't had that experience who's now in college, because their ability to, going to college, likely the first time a young person is away from home on their own, someone who's been, who's a child in the military environment, I should say. So they have a much more mature approach to all of this, generally speaking, and they're much less likely, I've found, to be sort of captured by so many of the shiny objects that come in college, and they're much more grounded, and that's a tremendous benefit, I think, that the military gives our children, which seems kind of weird, because they lived chaotic lives. How do they end up more grounded? Well, because they got used to chaos, right? They know that life is unpredictable, and maybe I'm going to be here for 2 years, and then I'm going to be off to Lord knows where, and on and on and on, and it just they just absorb it, right, by osmosis or something. So, look, but don't get me wrong, there are downsides too, right?
I was going to say, if you talk to my kids, they're bringing out the negative more, like, we made no long-term friends, we moved so much, I have no core. And it's like, but you traveled the world and you got to experience different cultures. So yeah, there's always a trade-off, but depending who we're interviewing, eventually I want to do stuff with kids too, and
Yeah.
the youth, and get them connected more online to have that support, because I'm realizing now that they're on the other side, like, man, it was a lonely world for them at some points, being the new kid in the school and getting bullied, not being in the in crowd, like all that stuff, because you're coming and going. But
Right.
somehow
Exactly.
we've gone on to children, but
Well, I think all of this is relevant, even though it's business lessons from the military, right?
yeah.
Business lessons in the end are just life lessons. So the most successful people in business are the ones who, they understand people, they understand how life works, and they're able to navigate it in a way that is beneficial for them and their customers and clients. So if we understand these things, we'll be much more successful in our professional life, than we would if we sort of hang on to mistaken impressions of how life works, right?
Very true. Very true. So yeah, we could keep going, but for the sake of time, let's move on to that third nugget, which had something to do with the transferring from out of the military, what kind of jobs are going into, where, that whole flow of where does a military mindset say, I'm going to get out of the military now, and this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. That was your third point, which I thought was like spot on. So can you elaborate on that again too?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the reminder, because I was trying to remember, what was the third point we talked about?
So many points.
So, in the work that I did, coaching people coming out of the military, one of the very common things, attitudes, I guess, that I found was, they would say, well, I think I'm going to look for a job, in the government or with a defense contractor, or maybe, like you were pointing out, like law enforcement, or maybe the fire department, would have been like, that's like really going crazy, right? And what I found was, no matter how much we loved our military lives, there were things about it that grated on us. And with all due respect to people in law enforcement, very tough job, people in the government, not an easy thing to do. The things that irritated us in the military are the same things that will irritate us in government connected jobs. That part doesn't go away. It stays the same. What goes away is the camaraderie and the teamwork that we experienced in the military. And so what I find is a lot of people become very unhappy in that environment. I mean, but the flip side is it's people are already feeling there's such a risk moving from the military to the business world. It's like, it's
safe. It's a safe move.
Exactly. This is the safe play. I'll continue to get a weekly, or a regular paycheck, and all of that. And what I encourage them to think about is what you really want to do. What will give you satisfaction in your business career that you couldn't get when you were in the military? Because that's what will motivate you to be successful. So when I use the example of a friend of mine, in fact, we did a show a number of I think about 2 years ago. So when we met, he was a naval flight officer. He had shore duty this particular when we met, and he was looking to leave the military. He's going to be retiring. And so I'm like, what are you going to do, shipmate? He's like, well, I think I'm going to go work for a defense contractor. He was working in the Pentagon at the time, or the Naval Annex, whatever it was. And
just like that, with the same facial expression, right? Rolling of the eyes, like, I guess I'm going to go like the facial. It tells it all.
And so as we're talking, he starts telling me about how, I think about 5-6 years ago, with a partner, he had started doing some real estate investing, and how they had built this into a really kind of a small company at the time. They had, a whole host of investors, and they were regularly doing new projects. And the excitement in his voice, listening to this, was palpable. So I finally stopped and I said, why aren't you going to pursue your real estate company full time? He said, oh, no, I couldn't do that. I'm like, why can't you do it? It's like, well, I don't know anything about running a real estate company. Like, I feel like we're in a face, or you're in a Zoom in, and I want to take a stick and hang. What are you talking about? You've already been successful. It's just you've been successful on a part-time basis. So how do you make this successful on a full-time basis, right? And over the year that, between when we first started talking and he, was actually getting out, we talked about this news. And I remember one day he called me up and he said, just thought you'd like to know, after talking to my wife, we decided that I should go into my real estate company full time. And you could hear he was excited, but a little bit scared, right? And I get it. It's like you're going from absolute financial security in the military to, being an aerialist with no net below you. It seems like, right?
So true. So true. It's a mindset shift, and that's what coaching's about. And you helped him see that shift and own it. But yeah,
right.
It's a scary time. There's a lot of fear of the unknown and all that, but there's also what's the reward on the other side if you actually, step into that fear.
Right. And I just want to add one more thing about this. Now, for my friend, it worked out really well. The business has grown. In fact, his partner, who had another business, ended up selling it and going into the real estate company full time. It worked out well for him. But I will say the first time out of the gate, it doesn't necessarily work out well. But that's okay too. I think that we should be comfortable with knowing that we can fail, because out of that failure should come greater understanding of who we are, what we want, how we can continue our service to our fellow citizens in the business world, how we can better take care of our families, and next time we're far more likely to be successful. So the idea that we have to be successful that first time out, I think that it kind of creates a sense of, no, I just can't do this, because if I'm not successful, it's destroying me, right?
Unnecessary stress, kind of, I love that you add that. And
exactly.
In coaching too, I say it's feedback, not failure. So we don't have to look at everything so negative, like it's a failure. You're just getting feedback for your next round. And there's so many vets I've talked to in different coaching circles that, they say, yeah, I tried to do this when I got out, didn't work. They go back to like a medical type school training, like they're trying all these different things. I said, that wasn't for me. But you got to try before you buy, kind of thing. Like you got to step out there and experience it all. And with, how do we all find the loves of our lives? Maybe it was, a lot of no, this is not the guy I'm dating, to I don't know what I'm looking for, but you've got everything else that somebody else doesn't have. So it's kind of like falling, into a relationship, but a relationship with your job. You kind of got to date around a little, and there's nothing wrong with that when you're getting out of that military side. So I'm glad that you add that in there. Like it does not have to be, perfect the first time out. Like it's just all learning. As long as you're finding joy when you get up every morning, something that gets you excited to get out of bed, something you get excited that lights you up to spend your time, something that you can blink for hours and time's gone by and you're like, oh my gosh, it's already the afternoon, because you're having so much fun in your flow doing what you love. So
exactly
what you're going for.
You mentioned something just a minute ago that I learned from one of the trainers. I took a sales training course early on in I had a business career before I joined the Navy, so I kind of did things backwards for most people. But so the fellow by the name of Tommy Hopkins, he was one of the best known, may still be the best known real estate sales trainer in the country. And he would teach us certain mantras. And one of them was, I never see failure as failure, but only the information I need to take the next step towards success. I think that's such a powerful philosophy. And to be honest, I don't remember much else of what I learned from Tommy Hopkins, but I do remember that. And I've done my best to allow that to guide me in my business career over the decades. And when we come at life from that perspective, we're never out of the game, right? It's just, okay, we had a hiccup, that happens. It's just like in war. You don't have to win every battle to win the war. Right? That. Even in World War II, we lost lots of battles, right? We lost Pearl Harbor big time, and yet somehow we ended up winning the war. And it's because we learned each time Especially, we didn't learn nearly as much from the battles we won as from the battles we lost. And it was those losing battles that taught us, okay, you know what? We don't have to conquer every single island in the Pacific. We can hop over islands and just let the enemy garrisons on those islands die on the vine because they can't get resupplied. But we don't have to kill our people taking every single island. That was a major leap in strategy for the United States in World War II, right? But it applies to our business lives. We don't have to win every battle, and we're probably going to learn more about what we want to do, what we need to do in the future by the things that don't go right than by the things that do. Wow.
Well, that 30 minutes just flew by, and I hope we can leave you with that positive note on the end that you're stepping in. Hopefully we've encouraged you and we've given you inspiration. So wherever you are in your season of leaving the military, think positive, move forward, step into the unknown, fall, stumble. It's going to be okay, and you'll find your way, but you got to work through it. So thank you so much, Kevin, for joining me during your busy schedule. And how do people find you just before we sign off here?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, certainly. I'm Kevin Bemel on LinkedIn. You can also go to my YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/@ the way to wow, just like it sounds, the way to wow. And you'll find, several hundred videos, I think that will help you in your transition. And you can also contact me through there. So if there's anything that I can do to help folks, I do a lot of, pro bono coaching still for my, fellow service members. And, that's really what it's all about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. God bless you. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely go check him out on LinkedIn, see what he's all about. He's just a wealth of knowledge, and we need all the support we can get out there. It's okay to raise your hand and say, I need help. You don't do life alone. Don't get isolated. Reach out. So thank you so much, Kevin. Bye-bye.
Hi, NASA.